Welcome to Adult Education. This is a first of a 2 Sunday presentation, and we are so lucky to have Dr. Simesha McEachern. Yeah, almost got it. She is the Associate Director of Children's Services at Presbyterian Medical Services, and also our local NAACP president. You may remember she delivered our message here at First Press on January 1st also. If I listed all her attributes and accomplishments, we wouldn't have time for her presentation. So I'm going to leave it at that. And I think we'll have time at the end for questions. Is that right? Okay. So this is Dr. Simesha.
Welcome back.
Yeah.
Good to be back. Thank you all so much. It is a thrill to be back with you all and talking about something that I'm very passionate about. So hopefully we will get through all of this. It's a lot of information, and I want to share it in a way that we can kind of take a little bit of time and absorb it, think about it. I will not be offended if you raise your hand and ask questions. It is completely fine with me. You can stop me at any time, but we'll definitely get to a place, okay? All right, and as previously stated, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about an agenda. I am a teacher at heart, so I cannot do things without an agenda, y'all. I apologize. That's who I am. Literally, it's who I am. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of investigate the source of the information we're talking about. Why is it relevant? It's very important to know, but why is it important to know? And we'll be discussing where you can also learn more. That's going to be very important. We'll also discuss challenging our beliefs and our views and our feelings, because all of those things mesh together in our existence, and it sets our lens for what we see, for how we obtain information, how we take in information. So we're going to take a minute and think about this. We're also going to take care of ourselves because this is heavy work. I can tell you right now, you've got to do a little bit of work and then you've got to do a little bit of relaxing because it is very heavy. It can be intense. So we want to give ourselves space for that. We'll also be talking about the first 5 characteristics. Once we get into those, you'll see why we had to do 2 separate sessions. It's a lot. So we'll hopefully get through here pretty quickly. Now, first of all, I want to, and I have to give credit where credit is due. This information comes from Characteristics of White Supremacy Culture. It was written by Tima Okun, and later Kenneth Jones joined in. It's very good information, and I want you all to know where it came from. I am not this brilliant. I just want you all to know. I'm just giving you what I got, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about why it's relevant. Clearly today, anywhere you can go outside, it's relevant right now. It's relevant in the room. It's relevant all over the place. So also, I want you all to really think about what we're talking about. So I'm not just speaking about how you personally feel. I'm talking about a huge system. And if you've ever felt like there was a conspiracy going on and something's happening, this is the real thing. So all of these feelings, attitudes, mindsets, all of the things that I'm going to talk about today, they're mindless in American society and culture. It's baked in. This is going to be a little bit like me giving you a blueberry muffin and telling you to take a pair of tweezers and pull out all the blueberries. It's a lot. It's baked into the system. So these attitudes, these thoughts, these feelings, they're all baked into the system. So when we go in to excavate those things in our own selves, in our own reality, we have to really take time, and it takes a tweezer to kind of pull those things out. We're all going to be, you're going to hear things that you do, You're going to hear things that I do. It's a part of our culture and our society. And that is why it's important to take it apart and take a really close look at it. If you want to learn more, I have a few suggestions. We've got some great books here and some other resources. So you can read the book Cast. It's an amazing book. Also, How to Be an Anti-Racist, great book. Me and White Supremacy is also a great book, and White Fragility. Some other resources, if you want to look at it from a historical perspective, that really gives you a good idea about kind of what's going on and where did it all come from. Great book to read is Who's Black and Why. It's amazing, and it's a good place to do a little bit of research about why are things exactly like this? Now, how did all of this get started? As well as the 1619 Project. That is an incredible book, which I am rereading. And if you are interested in doing your own work on your own implicit bias, this is not the bias that when you're saying, oh, don't come into this room because you're this way or that way. No, I'm talking about the stuff that really lives inside that says things like, why are they talking so loud? Why aren't they sitting down? They should be more. Those kinds of things. You really want to investigate those implicit biases that you may have. There's a great study that Harvard has done and has released, and you can go and take a quiz and find out where your own bias is. So here's our challenge today. We're going to challenge the way we believe things. So our beliefs. And I'm going to tell you right now, I don't know the way to end racism. Okay? I don't. I'm sorry. If you thought this was what it is, I'm going to be transparent right now. I got nothing on it. However, what I do have is a way to view the system. This is a way. So I don't want to say this is the way to view it. This is a way. We're also going to be challenging our views. And something that you hear may conflict with something that your inner voice says to you, and that's okay. That's a good thing. That means that you are being challenged and your views are being challenged, and that's good. I want you all to take a deep breath when that happens, and I want you to practice empathy and not sympathy. Here's the difference. If I design a classroom with sympathy, because I'm going to give you an educational example here, because, educated here. I'm like, see, I told you guys I'm a teacher. If I go into a classroom and I say, I want to teach my little Head Start children all about the world around them, I want to be a good teacher. So I'm going to go into the room, this empty room, I'm going to put up posters and all sorts of colors, and I'm going to put up the alphabet and their names and all of these things that I know work. If I go into the classroom and I design it with empathy, I don't go into the classroom and say, let me give these children everything they've never had. I sit on the floor. I see where their eye line hits. That's where I put the things. I know now that they can't see the alphabet up there, right? They can only see, they're this tall. If I have empathy, I'm going to sit on the floor and look to see what they see. So I want you to really approach this, not with sympathy, not, oh, so sorry. But I want you to approach it with, is that what it's like? Okay. Let me put those shoes on for a minute. Let me walk around in those. That's the empathy. So we want to move from, because when we have sympathy, we also create guilt. Guilt is the enemy of work. You cannot feel guilty and expect to be able to work through this information. So when you feel guilt or you feel bad, you feel negative, you're like, oh, that's terrible. I can't believe I did that. I want you just to take a breath. Breathe in, hold it for 5 seconds, and just release. And you're going to do that a couple of times. And here's why. I'm not just telling you stuff that makes you feel great. It will make you feel better, but here's what's happening inside. Way up in here, in the back, the most primitive part of the brain is called your amygdala, your fight, flight, or freeze, right? So there is no problem solving that happens in your amygdala. It's full reaction. It's get away from it. It's run. It's you're in danger. It's, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? That's where that is. That's the first thing that gets activated because it's the most primitive part of your brain. However, your problem solving takes part up here in your frontal lobe. So you have to give it a second to get from the amygdala to your frontal lobe where you can do something with it. Okay, so that's why we take a deep breath. We're going to wait. We're giving those signals a second to come so that you're not just, that's wrong. She's lying. She's done. It's going to give you a second to get that information from that part of your brain into the frontal lobe where you can process it. You can think. This is the same thing that happens when we are confronted. We almost got into a car accident, right? And you're like, you're screaming, you're in the car, you jump out and you're all upset. And then you realize, now that I think about it, I may have pulled out in front of them. And that's just the problem. So we want to do the same kind of thing. We just want to give it some time. All right, on to the first characteristic. Fear. I'm not going to lie, this one blew my mind. This is when I became really interested in this word. The very first characteristic of white supremacy culture is fear. If I'm afraid of you, if you're afraid of me, then we don't have to worry about being together, right? It's not going to ever happen because I'm afraid of you. You're afraid of me. We can't have conversation, right? But this fear causes disconnection. This disconnection can be from us across racial identities. So if you think when you see me, oh my gosh, if that's your first reaction is, oh, you're in fear. You're in fear. That part of the brain, that amygdala has been activated. So that fear is purposeful. You're supposed to be afraid of me. I'm supposed to be afraid of you. Because it doesn't work if we're not afraid of each other. Because what ends up happening is once we have a conversation and we're talking, we figure out we're exactly the same. And then we get really annoyed with that. And that wouldn't work well, right? You can't be controlled if you're like, oh no, she's the same as me. So it also attempts to disconnect us from ourselves within our own racial identity. It's the whole crabs in a bucket thing. Have you guys heard this? Okay. There's this concept that, oh, Black people will never rise above anything because they are crabs in a bucket. They just pull each other down and we'll just never get anywhere. And we hear this and we repeat it. And guess what? It is based in what? Fear. In fear. But if you're going to disconnect me from my own racial identity group, right? You've got to also disconnect me from nature. This is something that we don't really talk about, but I want you all to think about it. City planning, okay? Just imagine a city. Where are the highest buildings, the least access to great, clean, fresh air? Where? In the cities, right? If we're in cities, we have an artificial sense of day and night, right? all the bright lights, all the things. If anyone's ever gone to Vegas, this is the effect, right? The Vegas effect where you're just like, I don't know what time it is. Where am I? What's going on? That's a part of it, right? It's very much on purpose. You're not going to be like, oh, my circadian rhythm is completely fine because I can see when the sun comes up and when it goes down. No, you're disconnected from that. It is a plot, it is a plan. What else happens in nature? Biodiversity. If I can see out there, well, you know, these flowers come in red and white and yellow and green, and then I have to face that the same is true of all of us. So if I can keep you disconnected from nature, I can keep you from that realization. Then it disconnects us from ourselves and from. Now I don't feel comfortable now talking to God because I feel dirty. I don't feel good enough. And so because I don't feel good enough and I'm just trying to be good enough, I am disconnected from God. Not because of God's grace or a lack of God's grace. No, just the opposite. Because I'm choosing to walk away. And if I can get you to feel guilty and ashamed, then I can control what you see, who you see. So what is the antidote to all of this? Because I do not believe in giving just the problem without giving an antidote. It's connection. So instead of feeling fearful, we need to feel connected. Connected to who? Ourselves. When I realize, you know what, I make mistakes, I'm just like everybody else, I'm good sometimes not so much. My road is a little more like this than it is like this, or like this, which is what I think we all wish. But no, that's not what happens. It's more like this and then this. So if I'm connected to myself, I am now taking away the power from that fear, because they don't want you to be disconnected to yourself, because then you have to be also connected to God. Then you're connected to nature. And if you're connected to yourself, to God, to nature, guess what a natural outpouring of that is? We're connected to each other. Yes.
I have an example that's not race, but culture that shows this. I was in a dance class in Paris, and in the dressing room, everybody was in there taking off their clothes and putting on their dance clothes. Men and women, just take off your pants. I mean, nobody was naked, but they were just taking off their clothes, putting it on, and it just, for them, was just the most natural thing, because we have to get ready for class and we know you, and I just thought, what's wrong with this country? All these people would have to go to jail.
It's true. It's absolutely true. But it's only as big of a deal as we make it, right? And so when we are afraid of ourselves and, oh God, I don't want anybody to see me, I'm going to be way over there in the corner trying to do as little as I possibly can to wiggle into my other clothes as I'm putting on the other ones, and I'm going to put them over the other. It's a whole thing. But that's that fear, that shame, that is just mixed in to where we are. So that's the first characteristic. You ready for number 2? All right, everybody take a deep breath. I know. This is going to be a big one, okay? This is like a 4-part one, okay? Whew. Perfectionism, one right way, paternalism, and objectivity. That's all just one. Perfectionism is, my mistakes are personal. If I make a mistake, it is all on me. I'm going to have to stand up and I'm going to have to deal with it. If I make a mistake, I am a mistake. No, it's not true. And it also shows up in this way. I want to do things perfectly. So if I can't do them perfectly, I'm not going to do them at all. Guess what that keeps you from doing? Anything. You can't do anything the first time then, because you don't know if you're going to be good at it or not. This will keep you bound. If you have to be perfect at everything, that's a myth, guys. You don't have to do everything perfectly. It's okay. Then we also have this idea that there is one right way. There's one right way, and I could just go off on this, right? But it upholds some values while discounting other values. So if this is one right way to do this, then I'm going to be stuck in doing what was already done, because that's the only right way. People have all kinds of ways of coming up with solutions to problems if we listen. But if we have in our minds, listen, I come in and I'm going to give you a good church example because I grew up in the church my whole life. Okay. I'm going to come into the church. I sit on the third row in the second seat, and nobody better be there because everybody knows that is my seat and that is my area. So this is the right way to do it, right? Until you come in and there's a whole family of people sitting on your row, and you're like, y'all gotta go. Get up, let's go. This is my seat. Everybody knows it. I'm gonna need you to move. Okay, that's that same kind of very rigid thinking. Then we get into paternalism. This is the father knows best attitude. It's hard to give this up. Because don't we all just want somebody that knows best? No. We don't. It's a little bit scary to think there's not somebody that's like, all right, I'm going to give you the rules of the day, and I'm going to tell you, yeah. I'm not saying don't be a father. If you're a father, be a father. But when we take that outside of our families, outside of our family units, and the places where that belongs, and we try to apply that to the world, we're in trouble. The world is not in your house. Your house is not the world. What you can do in your house and play your role in your home is one thing. When we get outside of those walls, none of that applies. We're all equal. Otherwise, we wouldn't have said we have a society where all men are
And women.
and women are
Created
equal. That means I have my own autonomy. I can do things the way that I see fit, and it may not be your way. And it also makes people feel entitled to impose their feelings or their standards on other people. My standards are not your standards, and that's okay.
I said a question, something occurred to me. As a society, though, don't we have, and I'm talking about the entire society, we do have societal values that are not inappropriate always.
Right, absolutely.
I mean, and
Yes.
that's just as human beings who we are in a community. I mean, this church has values
Right.
as a community. So that's what, I mean, I think this is hard for me
Mhm.
to make these distinctions as
Yes.
to, there are good values and there
Mhm.
are ways in which we create those that are not bad, but then you take it here and it's imposing your values or this group's values on somebody else that may have their own values that are just as valid, if you will.
Absolutely.
So
So when we're getting into this area, and this is where we're talking about that thin line, because here's the difference. In the church, you sign up to the church. You have said, I want to be in this place at these times. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's what you're going to do. So that's a community led. and you have chosen that, you also have the right to leave. When we do this in a big picture, all of society, that's why we end up saying, you need to get out of this country because that's the difference. That's the difference. And it's not made by everybody. And that's the other thing. When you go into a church setting or in a place that is good, what you'll notice is that all the people have a say so. Everybody has something to contribute, and that's acknowledged. But when we're talking about paternalism and this one right way, it is somebody that we don't know. Some unidentified figure has made up these rules that we are all going to follow. And if you're here, then you have to follow these rules too. That gets a little bit hairy though. Yes.
Doctor, congratulations on the Southside Family Center. And I think in Santa Fe, we fall victim of this paternalism, east side, south side. And the assumption that if only people on the south side would just conform to what is familiar to us, how much better it would be, whether it's in schools and clinic settings, neighborhoods. So I think I'm looking for advice of how to be different.
Absolutely. And we're gonna get to an antidote, I promise. I promise. I'm so glad that you all are listening and actively engaging. Yeah.
This goes to a little bit of the values, and there's a difference between your personal values and sort of what society says we have to do to all get along. It's like you pull up to a red light, you stop, and everybody has to do that. Otherwise, it's complete chaos. That's an external rule.
Right.
It's
Absolutely.
imposed on us.
Mhm.
Some people may not like the color red, but everybody has to do that. And then there are countless other things that just make society function. But then I can see how it's a thin line between this is what we have to do to make things work, institutions and laws. And if you go in this store, you have to pay for the item before you take it out. These type of things. But then, there's shades of gray in there. And
Absolutely.
I think this is one of the difficulties that a lot of people have, that is, where does that become an imposition and patriarchal, and where does it become sort of the things that we all have to do to get along?
Absolutely.
It's difficult area.
So one of the things that you will notice with these, and this is going to be your line. This is going to be kind of your, it's going to be your dividing line. Who made the laws? Who made them? And why? So that's going to be your line. So here we have traffic lights. What is that designed to do? Make sure that traffic flows. And we all have a responsibility, and we'll get to that in a little bit, to follow those rules and those laws. I'm not saying have better. I am not saying that at all. What I am saying is that we all agree to that, though, right? When you go and you get your driver's license, you have signed up to follow those laws. You have signed up to do all of those things. What we're talking about here is those unwritten rules, those little tiny things, and it can change from community to community. What is proper to do here in Santa Fe is not proper to do in Austin, Texas, where I was, or in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where I grew up. So those are the kinds of things, those colloquialisms, those, I know that when you say something is cherry, I know it's good. Okay. We don't say that in North Carolina. We don't do that. But if I make that a law, when something is good, you're going to say it's cherry. End of story. Well, it didn't take you into consideration. It didn't take me into consideration. It didn't take anybody else who's not in the area into consideration. And that's where we have to kind of rethink. This is also why the Constitution is a living, breathing document. To perfect, to get better, to include, because this is the reality of our nation. So we want to get better at saying, oh, man, we forgot about that part. Let me add that in. And we can do that. And that's the kind of thing that we want to get in mind. That things we can open up and we can take people's voices and take their experiences into what we are doing, but also allow them to also govern themselves. Because the issue is here, I can follow what you say, or I can do what I know is right. One more thing in this one. Objectivity. This is a myth. We say, you have to make decisions with no feelings whatsoever. You can only do things based on logic. Well, well, not really. We all have our feelings. We all are taking our emotions and our emotional states into consideration when we act. And that's okay. We just can't say, I'm being completely objective and I'm not making any judgments. I'm only using pure logic and everything. Reality, we have emotions. They are useful. Your emotions are your road signs. They're your signs. They tell you stop. They tell you yield. They tell you slow down. They tell you don't merge here. You know, that's what your emotions are. Nothing more, nothing less. How you navigate that just gives you the information. You still have to navigate. And that's where logic comes in. Don't worry, we've got antidotes. Here we are. To get rid of that idea of perfectionism, we need to create a culture of support around ourselves. That means I'm okay if you make a mistake. Because guess what happens? Mistakes. It happens all the time. But we don't want to punish people for making a mistake when they're learning, right? So we want them to learn. We want to embrace learning. Learning is risky. If you're learning anything new, you're going to make mistakes. It's the best part of learning. That's how you figure it out. Oops, I really shouldn't have done that. Oh my goodness. Yeah. Well, now what am I going to do the next time? Have I learned something from it? That's where our focus can be. So process over perfection. I'm maybe one day going to be a lot better at this. I'm not great at it right now. I'm going to keep practicing. I'm going to keep trying. I'm going to fail a few more times, and eventually, I've got it right. The one right way. There's lots of ways to reach the same goal. Make sure that you're noticing when you get defensive about something. Not change it. Investigate. That's what I'm saying. These are your, oh, stop. Let me think about this. That's all. I'm just giving you something to think about. Paternalism, more power to the people. If it's one person making all the rules for everybody, it doesn't work out so well. There's a lot of situations, there's a lot of things, right, that happen. And remember that there should be nothing about us without us. So if it is going to apply to me, I need to have a say in it. So, quick example. This was something that I heard at the NAACP state conference last year, and it has stuck with me. This man said, if you don't have a seat at the table, you are on the menu.
Oh.
If we want to fight paternalism, we need to get off the menu and have a seat at the table. And that's the difference between paternalism, because we can agree on a lot of things. we can agree that, okay, we have to do this or this or this, right? We can agree with that. But it's because I want to. Because hey, and sometimes it's, I want to have a relationship with you. I want to be friends with you. So yeah, I can do this. Excuse me. I hear that that makes you uncomfortable, so I'm not going to do it. Or, that really makes me uncomfortable. Once again, going back to fear, because if we don't connect, we can't have these conversations, right? And then to fight that idea that we have to be objective in everything, just understand that everybody has a worldview. And when you're sharing your opinion, it's going to come from your worldview, I would hope. And you're not just making stuff up. I think you should really believe what you're saying. So that's another thing. All right, characteristic 3. I know that was a lot. This is the myth of the qualified. This leads to the white savior complex. No one can save us. It's not a thing. It's inclusion is watering down. It's not. And that leads to microaggressions. Have you all ever heard of what a microaggression is? I'm seeing lots of heads nodding yes. This is what leads to it. You have to be qualified. I'm glad that I'm a doctor, but if I wasn't a doctor, if I didn't have that title, I would still understand this and I could still share it. There are lots of ways that we tell people that they're not qualified to do something, right? And we require them to become qualified or what we view as qualified. And sometimes that's a moving target too.
Could you,
Oh, yes.
before you leave that, could you explain a little more about inclusion is watering down,
Yes.
please?
So you all remember affirmative action, correct? And all that's been going on with that. Well, excuse me, one of the arguments that was made against including people was that, well, the quality is going to go down. Well, they're not as qualified. Come on. Come on. They're not going to know what I know. Come on. It's what we do to people, right? So that's that kind of, if we include everybody, then we're not as effective. No, but you have to slow down though. And that's one thing, to be purposefully inclusive takes longer. And it takes more thinking, and it takes a lot more digging, and it takes a lot more investigation. And sometimes that feels like it's just long and slow. However, if you don't, you fall into those other categories where you're making rules for people to follow. So the antidote for the myth is that we have to internalize that there are ways of knowing. There are ways of knowing outside of what I'm saying to you. There are ways of understanding that are outside of what I'm telling you, and that's okay. Don't feel guilty because you didn't do this or you didn't do that. We have to start where we are. Then we have to release the guilt about not knowing. If you hear something here that you didn't know and you're like, gosh, that was true and I didn't know it. Guess what? Don't feel guilty about it. When you know better, do better. Thank you, Maya Angelou. When you know better, do better. And then become aware of how it shows up and where it shows up for you. Because you may be feeling like, why are you telling me this? It's only when we become really humble that we are able to really learn things. So this is about using a little bit of humility. Wow, I can't talk. Using a little bit of humility. It's okay. I don't know everything. So here's characteristic 4. Trying to watch my time here. So we're going to get real speedy here. We have the either or and the binding. It has to be this way or that way. And then that also leads to oversimplifying very complex situations. And then it pits oppression, I'm sorry. It pits people against each other in the end. Because instead of acknowledging how it's interconnected to each other. I'm gonna spare you guys. Tell me if you've already heard this one, okay? There's a man, he's standing by the river, there's a baby coming down the river. You guys heard this? All right, I'm gonna tell you the story really quick. I'm gonna try. There's a man, he's by a river, he's enjoying a beautiful day. It's a beautiful Sunday, probably like this. He looks up and oh my goodness, here comes a baby floating down the river. Oh my gosh, whew, he's got to get in there. He saves the baby. Oh, phew. By the time he gets the baby down on the shore and he puts the baby down, guess what he sees? 2 more babies floating down the river. Oh my goodness. Now he's got a problem. So he gets in and he's able to save those 2 babies. Well, right around the time he gets those babies on the shore, guess what? There's 4, 5, 6, there's 20 babies. He has to call out for help. He's like, hey guys, come over here, get the babies out of the river. Everybody rushes over. They're in the water. They've got a whole brigade line going, getting babies out of the water. The man stands up and walks over, and someone says, where are you going? We're trying to save all these babies. He said, I'm going to go down the river and figure out who's putting all these babies in the water. We want to sometimes solve the babies in the water. We don't want to figure out why and who's putting the babies in the water. So if we stick with this either or, it has to be right or left. It must be this, it must be that. When we do that, we oversimplify those issues, those concerns. It's difficult to look at racism as just one thing, isn't it? It's big. It's a lot bigger than we even talk about. And it comes out in so many different ways. So we have to be able to think of things on multiple levels and be willing to solve. Notice when we in ourselves, the antidote for this either or in the binary is to acknowledge when we hear ourselves saying things like that. Ask yourself, is that really right? Wait, really right? Just a quick examination. Notice when you are oversimplifying very complex situations and things. For example, when you see someone who is struggling with homelessness, if you say, they're lazy, that is the biggest oversimplification you can hear. You don't know if that person has mental health issues. You don't know how well they're able to manage money. You don't know their opportunities. You don't know their educational level. You don't know what's happened to them. Are they the victim of trauma and abuse? All of those things lead to where they are. So it's very difficult to judge people by where they are instead of knowing their whole situation. So when we talk about why can't we fix homelessness, it's because it's a complex issue. It's because it's multifaceted. It's got all of these things that come about just from this one little thing. And we have to be open to that. And then it's important to acknowledge the interconnectedness of oppressions. So you may be looking at what we're talking about, let's say, we're just going to talk about racism today. But guess what that intersects with? Sexism, culturalism, classism. I could keep going. I'm like, I don't have an arm long enough for this, but it intersects all of those things, all of the isms, right? So we have to acknowledge this is a big thing and it comes out in different ways. All right, we're on to 5. We're going to make it, I think. All right, progress is bigger, it's more, or quantity over quality. That means that in order to be successful, you have to be bigger. You have to have more. It's all about, well, what are your numbers? How do we know that you're good? Because you have high numbers and you're doing all the things perfectly.
We have a little of that going on at church. If we had more members, it would show the community that we're good, that we're a great place. and the bigger the better.
Right, absolutely. And once again, none of these things are bad in and of themselves. It's how this impacts our life and where the culture goes from here. I'll give you a good example. Statistics was not a thing. Don't like them. Don't like them. I love to use them when, when they're relevant, but not a fan. It's a whole science. It's a whole thing. And it focuses on numbers, all the numbers. But when we lose the connection between the numbers and the people that it represents, now we're getting into a dangerous place. Now remember, I'm just going to remind you all, Christ himself told a parable where the shepherd left the 99 and went out for the one, because that's how valuable each one of us is. All 99 of them. Where's that one? Just that one. And that's a powerful thing to remember as well. So we don't want to be so dependent on numbers and statistics when we need to be looking at people and situations. So the antidote is to develop a more holistic view of growth. Growth never looks like this. It always looks like this and this and this and this. And then sometimes you're going to be way up here, but then sometimes you're going to be way down there. That's what the growth process looks like. And then we have to look at other ways to measure progress towards our goals. So not just the numbers, but maybe our ministries are being more effective. Maybe we're reaching more people out in the community. Wow, that's huge. So just looking at different ways to view it. Also distinguishing between growth and the desire for more. Growth is different. Growth is what seeds do in the ground. And it's hard. And it's rough. Have you ever thought about how violent it is to grow? Have you ever thought how violent it is for something to break through and grow? And it takes a while. And that's okay. Is it worth growing anyway? Absolutely. When we think about seeds, they have to break through the seed. That whole plant, the whole thing that it's ever going to be, is contained in that little tiny seed. But it can't get to that place unless we allow it to sprout. It's got to grow. It's got to break through. And this is what we are doing as a society. We can get to a better place. We can be better. We just have to work at it. And we have to understand that it's steps like this, even coming and listening to someone talk about it, is a step in the right direction. That's growth too. I always like to end with a quote. One of my favorites, James Baldwin, said, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced." Amen. So, are there any questions? Any thoughts?
Yes, I've thought about what you said right in the beginning about fear, how fear makes us afraid of the other.
Yes.
One time I had somebody staying with me and I had gone for a walk, and when I came back from walking, there were 4 police officers standing outside of my door. And they said, "Oh, we're here to arrest so-and-so." And I said, "Oh, well, this is where I live." And they said, "Is he here?" And I said, "Yes, he's there." I said, "Okay, I will open the door." And they said, "But does he have a gun?" And I said, "No, he doesn't have a gun." But I could tell that the police officers were afraid. They were so afraid. I said, "Don't worry, he's going to open the door. He doesn't have a gun." And I called him on my phone, the guy
Yes.
inside. I said, I have 4 police officers out here. They're here to arrest you. And just open the door, okay? And so he did. He opened the door and then they arrested him. But the person who was the most calm was the woman officer. She was the one who just exuded this calm and not being afraid, and she was telling him what he could do, if he could put his shoes on, if he could take a piece of paper with phone numbers on it. But one of the police officers, he was almost shaking with fear.
Absolutely.
Despite the fact that I had assured him that this person inside did not have a gun. But that's, what leads to violence and mistaken shootings and things like that.
Absolutely. And if you come at me and you think I'm a threat already, it doesn't matter how upset or annoyed or frustrated or anything else I am. My life is now in danger. And what is frightening is that so many people of color have had to train themselves. Think about this, had to train themselves on how to approach someone that's scared to death of them. Even though they are unarmed, they have nothing. You're the police officer, you've got training, you've got, a gun, I'm assuming, and all of those things, and you've got all this power, and I'm just here by myself, just standing here, and you're scared of me. It's because it's baked into the culture. They want you to be afraid. And sometimes that comes up in those moments. And whose fault is that? Certainly not the victim. So we can't victim blame either. Sorry. We can't victim blame either and say, oh, well, these people that caused that. I wish you would just if you had just complied. If you had just had you can comply. But if somebody is scared of you, they're in that amygdala area instead of their frontal lobe, they can't see me. They don't see me. They see whatever it was that they thought they were seeing. There's this great episode of Black Mirror. If you haven't watched Black Mirror, there's a great episode. But what ended up happening, this is a sci-fi kind of thing. But the military in this particular area had programmed people to think that the people that they were going against were aliens. And they were monsters. And so every time they looked at a person, that's all they could see was the monster. And they're like, ah. And they're having these reactions and these big reactions to those people because that's all they could see. Well, then one day this guy gets a light flashed in his eyes, and all of a sudden he doesn't have that anymore. And he's starting to see people, and he's like, and the people are talking to him, and he's thought the whole time that they were growling at him. And for the first time, he was able to say, oh, wait, this is a person? You want me to hurt this person? What are you doing? And it's like it finally clicked for him. Because now he could see people in the way that they were seen, and the way that they were.
I'm wondering about greed and underneath fear. We were talking about the border and immigration, migration that's going on. The need to make the other smaller,
Yes.
and in fact, call them aliens
Yes.
and call them illegal aliens.
Yes.
To justify being on a land and a piece of land you really just want for yourself and increase that back to colonialism. Absolutely. And the whole mechanism around making those on the land feel small.
Right. Because none of it works if you're my equal. You can't use any of these things if I view you as being equal. Well, then we're the same. And then I can't vilify you. And I can't get everybody else on my side to tell them that you're less than, because I know that you're just like me. So all of this really grows in that environment of, first of all, we're afraid of each other. Doesn't tell you why you need to be afraid of it, but you need to be afraid. And then you're like, oh gosh, well, what? So then your heart starts to race. This is all the messaging that we get, you know?
You have fear, but you also have that desire to control.
Yes.
This is, we want to preserve the status quo.
Right.
Because we have it very well, and if we just let anybody come into the country club, it's just not going to be the same. So,
Right.
you know, we have to do everything we can. We'll raise the fees. We'll, you know, do this. You have to drive a certain kind of car. So
Yeah.
you make it more difficult. So you create these barriers to entry, but it allows you to control the
Right.
population, and it sort of oppresses everybody else. And we see
Absolutely.
that play out across.
Absolutely.
So
And
sometimes it's not so much fear, but it's a means to control
absolutely.
and to gain power. I think that's why there's so much partisanship in the US, because of the way we talk about the opposition.
Absolutely.
They're communists, they're animals.
Right.
And we see this now in the war between Israel and Hamas. They're
Absolutely.
talking about they're not humans. And
Right.
that's,
Absolutely.
that just, yeah. And it creates fear, but it's also control.
Absolutely. Because guess what? If you're an animal, then I don't have to treat you well. I don't have to treat you like a human being. I don't have to think about the complexities that made you feel the way that you feel. And I certainly don't have to bother about looking at myself, for goodness sake.
Yeah.
I'm not doing that.
And I think of the racial slurs that are taught to our youth in the military, probably people from Germany or Japan or Vietnam or Afghanistan, calling them inhuman terms and downplaying them as human beings, like Bruce was saying.
Absolutely.
Well, I think for warfare to work, you have to dehumanize the
Yeah.
person that you're supposed to shoot.
Right.
Yeah.
That
Because who
you're,
wants to go out and kill people?
well, I hope that the majority of human beings would not choose to go out and kill another human being. But in order, I believe that in order for there to be an effective way to make people go do that kind of harm to another human being, you have to, I mean, that's the reason we came up with as human beings came up with names for the Germans, names for the Japanese, names for the Vietnamese, as you said, because that demeans them, it makes them less than, and then somehow we can go out, those people can go out and take a life.
And through the years within America.
Oh, yes.
Obviously, we have done this. We all grew up with.
Well, Alice, I was thinking the other day, I don't know what prompted it in my head. Growing up, I grew up in southeastern Kansas. I was born in 1949. So that's the era that I came up in. And how many different names we had for Mexican Americans, Italian Americans, because we had a lot of Italians that had come in to work the mines in strip mines in southeastern Kansas. And I learned that as a child.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not saying my parents they didn't go around, but I learned it somewhere. School, other kids, and it was like a revelation, I can still remember somebody used a word to talk about Italians. And it was like, I didn't realize we were supposed to think less of Italians, how do you recognize them? How do you know who they are?
That's exactly.
With a black person or a brown person, somebody who might have a different color skin than you did, I can identify that person, but you cannot identify, or certainly as a fifth grader, I couldn't tell if somebody was Italian or German or Greek or whatever they were, they might. So we do learn, we are taught. It's the old South Pacific song, carefully taught. Yeah.
Yeah, it's so true.
But you all know how those Texans.
I'm like,
To be honest, there's some that are just, I'm just saying. Anyway, sorry, I had to say it.
No, I had an example of watering down. Because I'm on a board at the School for the Arts, and I was the chairman of the orientation committee by name. And this other person was doing everything, had everything all mapped out. And we had a meeting with the overall board to talk about what we were going to do. You know, they said, well, it's too long and shouldn't do this, shouldn't do that. And so I just politely asked the acting coordinator, since I was the chair, if I could just rearrange the agenda. And she said, you can do anything you want to. But she couldn't imagine that I could make it better than her, which I did. Yes.
I think the most frustrating or just discouraging thing is I just finished the book Horse. And we've not moved a dime. We haven't moved off the dime, not even a molecule.
It's what you start to learn when you work on this is that it is intentional. It is
Totally.
intentional. And it was thought about, it was studied, it was planned. And that is why to pull apart your identity, if you've never had a time where you had to really think about your identity and all of those things that make you up, then it's okay to hate, right? It's okay to think somebody that does so-and-so is less than you because you don't do it. But when we really turn that mirror on ourselves and we are looking at, how do I feed into this? What are the things that I do that perpetuate this, that cause this to happen? That's where our power lies. Our power is not in the past. It's gone. It already happened. This was already set up. You didn't do it. I know you didn't do it. I'm going to venture to say that nobody in this room has owned slaves. Yes? Okay. See? You didn't. But does it impact me? Does it impact you? Absolutely. Absolutely it does. Every day and in all of these different ways.
I read or heard something on NPR the other day, and there's a man who had done research connecting gun laws that we now are trying to deal with slavery, because he was saying that because of slavery, slave owners had to have guns, according to them. They had to be able to control their property. And so they had to have guns. And so the South continues to be more in love with their guns because it's a cultural tradition that most people today may not even make that connection between gun ownership and slavery. So, I mean, when you get into some of these things, which I had never thought, I mean, you know, that had never occurred to me either, that is a connection. So when you're talking about systemic racism, that's just one little tiny component.
There you go.
And if you look hard enough, you're going to find it here and here and here.
There is this, once again, with all of those intersections, there's this string. There's just this little part that runs through all of those things. And only when we are careful and mindful, and even, I'm not telling you that you have to go out and do everything different today. I just need you to take a deep breath and think about it. That's all. I just need you to know and think and see how it changes you. See if you can be just a little bit better than you were yesterday, a little bit more aware than you were yesterday. That's all any of us can do. That's how it overwhelmingly changes.
I love your example of the blueberry muffin. I was born in Atlanta and raised in Nashville, and I'm almost 80 years old, and I would like to think that's all behind
but they're little blueberries still left.
Yes.
Yeah.
But once you pull them out, it's still standing.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's a part of what we do here. That's a part of doing this work is that, hey, I've got some things that had to come out, but boy, it sure did leave a rain
Yeah.
where it used to be. And that then becomes the next step. And once again, if we don't believe that there's a process, we get frustrated and we go, I'm not doing this. I'm not going to be the waiter. Forget this. This is too much. It costs too much, takes too much energy, takes too much time. I don't have the energy for this. I don't have the capacity.
But don't you think it's okay to do that every now and then?
Guess what?
Give yourself a break.
Yes,
I mean, I'm just,
you
yeah,
have to.
yeah.
This is not any one person's burden to bear and carry it on your back. You're going to go into the grocery store later today. You got to eat at some point. You've got to do all of these other things at some point. So it's okay to hold that and know and say, "Whew, man, that's something I'm going to think about later." Put it down for a second. Go about your life. If you're working on something else, you can't really work on all of these things at the same time. Just know that, hey, it's up here. I'm going to get to it. This is still important. Sometimes I'm going to take it off. I'm going to take a bite and be like, whoo.
Well, when you look at the health outcomes of people of color, you recognize I mean, without getting too much into the weeds, the cortisol levels. I mean, when
Absolutely.
you're under stress, any of us, when we're under stress, those cortisol levels go up, and that does bad things to your body. It's that flight or, the whole
Yeah.
hindbrain business. And if you don't put that aside occasionally and just take care of yourself,
Absolutely.
I mean, that's something that I think, again, a lot of white people don't realize the stress and the effect that it has on people who are feeling those feelings on a daily basis.
Absolutely. And there's not a place. I'm going to give you an example. How many Black people are in this room? How many white people? Did you count? Probably not. I walked into the room, I knew instantly
Yeah.
who was in here and who wasn't. That's safety. That's passed down, and that's been safety. Chances are, if I'm by myself, oh boy. Whew. All right, who can I ally myself with? It's a thing. It's really a thing. But you don't know it's a thing because no one's ever told you. Like when I walk into the room, I'm like, oh, I'm safe. These are things that.
Well, and a friend told me about having the talk with her son.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, it just made me want to cry to hear and the talk being with a child. If you get stopped by the police, you put your hands up on the steering wheel and you do not move them. I mean, I never had that talk with my sons. I never had to say to them, I mean, I had other talks, but I mean, I never had to say to them, you do this, you say, yes, sir, yes, ma'am, you do whatever you have to do. And that just, it makes me so sad to think that if you have a Black child, that you have to have that talk.
And that same friend said, if to her son,
Yes,
if you go into the home of a white person, never be in a room by yourself. Always have someone else with you when you go in that room. Protect yourself in case
something goes missing.
in case somebody accuses you of something. And that to me,
It just breaks your heart.
I got two more things and then we're on.
Thank you for coming, and you'll be back.
Yes, I will be back.
So continuing dialogue, I do remember that in the Juneteenth, sermon around or about Juneteenth, you said, there was that body of people that started celebrating before it was declared. The rumor was out, they just started celebrating. And I wonder the wisdom in the midst of challenge of being different, of just taking some action steps. A little one
Absolutely.
out of that, you know, things are gonna be good.
Because we're trying to move the needle. This is not work that I started, and it's not work that I'm gonna be able to finish. And knowing that you can start something and you may not ever finish it, but it's still worth doing. It's still worth planting that tree, even if I never see it. One last.
I was waiting.
Oh, no, right in front of you, you had one.
I did read the book you recommend, Asked,
Mhm.
and it was hard to get through, but it's something that we all need to educate ourselves on, and you find out things you had no idea, and not that long ago, and they continue. So you need to be aware, and also an antidote for us, living in other cultures, our kids learn when they stand out and they're different and they're not always accepted. And it's not culture, or it's not color, it's just you're different.
Yeah.
And you're the minority and we're gonna treat you differently. People need to get out of their comfort zone and realize what other people experience.
Absolutely. Once again, going back to that, instead of having sympathy, have empathy.
Yeah.
Sit down on the floor.
Thank you so much.
Yes.